The night air at Vauxhall Gardens was thick with laughter and the scent of crushed roses, until it wasn't. One moment, Thalia Voss was adjusting the silver mask across her eyes, her gloved fingers trembling just slightly from the thrill of the masquerade. The next moment, the thunder of hooves shattered everything. A carriage horse, startled by a sudden firework, broke free and charged straight toward her through the crowd. People screamed. Thalia froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. She saw the wild eyes of the beast, the flash of iron shoes rising above her head. Then strong arms crashed around her. Cassian Drake pulled her down and rolled with her across the damp grass, shielding her body with his own. For 3 desperate seconds, the world narrowed to the heat of his chest, the rapid beat of his heart against hers, and the rough sound of his breathing near her ear. He saved her life. But someone was watching. A hidden artist, brush moving furiously in the shadows, captured that single moment and turned it into something dangerous. The very next morning, London woke to scandal. In the most prestigious gallery on Bond Street, a large portrait hung for all to see. The painting showed a woman in a torn silver gown, mask askew, locked in what looked like a passionate embrace with a tall, powerful man whose face was unmistakable, even in profile. Beneath it, in elegant gold lettering, read the words, "The Duke's Secret Mistress." Thalia stood frozen in the middle of the gallery, her face drained of color. Her hands shook as she clutched the edges of her cloak. This wasn't just gossip. This was ruin. Whispers rippled through the crowd like poison. Is that Miss Voss? With the future Duke of Blackthorn? In public? Like that? Her reputation, so carefully guarded for 24 years, had been shattered in a single night. And worse, the Voss family's largest business contract with the Blackthorn estate now hung by a thread. One wrong word, and her father, Victor Voss, could lose everything they had built. Thalia's throat tightened. She wanted to scream that it wasn't real, that it was only 3 seconds of terror, that Cassian Drake had only been protecting her. But no one would believe her now. Later that afternoon, in the grand drawing room of Blackthorn House, Cassian stood tall and rigid before his father, the Duke. His jaw was clenched so tightly the muscle jumped. "I will take full responsibility," he said, voice low and controlled. "I will publicly apologize and explain the truth." The Duke's eyes were cold as winter steel. "Explain?" "The portrait has already spoken louder than any words you can offer. The contract with the Voss family is in jeopardy. Our name is being dragged through the mud." Cassian's hands curled into fists at his sides. For the first time in years, the ice around his heart cracked with something dangerously close to fear. That same evening, Thalia received a summons. When she stepped into the dimly lit library of Blackthorn House, Cassian was already there, standing by the fireplace, one hand gripping the mantel so hard his knuckles turned white. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Thalia lifted her chin, her voice trembling with quiet fury and barely contained tears. "I am not your mistress, Lord Drake. I never was. But from this moment on, all of London will believe I sold my soul to the future Duke." Her words hung heavy in the air between them. Cassian stared at her, gray eyes stormy with emotions he refused to name. He remembered the way her body had felt against his on that grass, the way she had gasped his name in terror, the way, for one brief, terrifying second, he hadn't wanted to let her go. He took one slow step closer. "Then we have only one choice left," he said, his voice rough, almost broken. "A choice that will bind us both, whether we want it or not." Thalia's heart pounded wildly. She searched his face, looking for any sign of warmth, any hint of the man who had risked his life to save hers. Instead, She saw only duty and something deeper, something that frightened her even more than the scandal itself. Because in that moment, Thalia Voss realized the nightmare had only just begun. And somewhere in the shadows of London, the real danger was only starting to wake. The heavy oak doors of Blackthorn House closed behind Thalia with a sound like a prison gate. She stood in the grand entrance hall, her gloved hands clenched so tightly the fabric bit into her palms. 3 months. That was the price the Duke of Blackthorn had demanded to save both families from ruin, a fake betrothal. Cassian Drake waited for her at the bottom of the sweeping staircase, tall and impossibly composed in his dark evening coat. His gray eyes watched her approach without warmth. "My father has spoken," he said quietly, voice steady as stone. "You will stay here, under this roof, for the remainder of the season. We will announce our engagement tomorrow evening. The contract between our families will be preserved." Thalia lifted her chin, though her heart hammered wildly. "So I am to be your prisoner, dressed in silk and lies?" Cassian's jaw tightened. For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Regret, perhaps, but it vanished as quickly as it had come. "This is not a prison, Miss Voss. It is a necessity, a transaction, nothing more." The words landed like ice against her skin. She remembered the way he had held her that night at Vauxhall, the desperate strength of his arms, the way his breath had brushed her cheek. And now he spoke of her as if she were nothing but ink on a legal document. Lady Arabella Thorne arrived the next morning as her official companion, her warm smile the only familiar comfort in this cold, gilded cage. Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, the Voss family's longtime housekeeper, who had been temporarily assigned to Blackthorn House, moved silently through the halls like a watchful shadow. She was the only servant who knew the truth behind the engagement. Her kind eyes followed Thalia with quiet understanding. But even they could not protect her from the eyes of London. Lord Edmund Harrington appeared at the first private dinner, invited by the Duke himself. His smile was too smooth, his gaze too knowing, as he leaned closer to Thalia across the candle-lit table. "I must say, Miss Voss," he murmured when Cassian was momentarily called away, "it pains me to see a woman of your spirit trapped in such a cold arrangement. If ever you need someone to rescue you from the future Duke's icy grip, you need only say the word." Thalia forced a polite smile, but inside, her stomach twisted. Every word from Harrington felt like another chain tightening around her throat. That night, alone in the lavish guest chamber overlooking the moonlit gardens, Thalia stood before the tall mirror. She stared at her own reflection, the same woman from the scandalous portrait, now dressed in the finest silk Blackthorn money could buy. She felt like that painting, hung on display, admired, judged, whispered about, owned. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I am not a portrait," she whispered fiercely to her reflection. "I am not something to be looked at and pitied." Down the hall, in his private study, Cassian Drake poured himself a glass of brandy, but barely touched it. He stood at the window, staring out into the darkness. He had told her it was only a transaction. He had lied. Because every time he looked at Thalia Voss now, something inside him stirred. Something dangerous and alive. For years he had buried every feeling beneath layers of duty and control. But these past few days, watching her move through his home with quiet defiance and hidden pain, she made him feel, truly feel. And that terrified him more than any scandal ever could. The days that followed settled into a tense rhythm. They appeared together at balls and garden parties, playing the perfect engaged couple. Cassian offered his arm with mechanical politeness. Thalia smiled until her cheeks ached. But in the quiet moments between performances, when no one was watching, the air between them crackled with unspoken words. One evening, after a particularly vicious round of whispers at Lady Worthington's soiree, Thalia escaped to the dimly lit library. She sank into a leather chair, pressing trembling fingers to her temples. The door opened softly. Cassian stepped inside. He hesitated in the doorway, as if unsure whether he should enter or retreat. "I saw what they said to you tonight," he said at last, his voice lower than usual. "I'm sorry." Thalia looked up at him, eyes bright with exhaustion and something sharper. "Sorry?" She gave a bitter, broken laugh. "You stand there so cold, so perfect, while I feel like I'm slowly disappearing. Tell me, Lord Drake, when this is all over, will you even remember the woman you used to save your family's precious contract?" Cassian crossed the room in 3 slow strides and stopped just before her chair. He looked down at her, conflict raging behind his carefully controlled expression. "You think I don't see you?" he whispered. His voice cracked just slightly. "You think I don't feel every single stare that wounds you? God help me, Thalia. You are the first person in years who has made me remember that I am still alive." The raw honesty in his words stole her breath. For one fragile heartbeat, the ice between them thinned dangerously. Then Cassian stepped back, as if burned. He turned toward the door, shoulders rigid once more. This arrangement, it must remain exactly what it is, a necessity. He left without another word. Thalia sat alone in the silent library, heart pounding, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the wild rhythm beneath her palm. Because in that moment, she realized the truth she feared most. She was no longer afraid of being trapped in Blackthorn House. She was terrified of how much she was beginning to want the man who held the key. And somewhere in the shadows of London, Lord Edmund Harrington smiled as he penned another carefully worded letter, ready to tighten the noose even further. The walls of Blackthorn House seemed to close in a little tighter with every passing day. Thalia moved through the grand corridors like a ghost in silk, smiling when required, speaking when spoken to, but inside she felt herself slowly fracturing. The fake betrothal was suffocating her. Every polite touch from Cassian's hand at her waist during public appearances burned like a brand she couldn't escape. Yet something was shifting. Late one rainy afternoon, Cassian stood in his private study, staring at a letter delivered by a trusted footman. The contents made his blood run cold. Lord Edmund Harrington had not only spread new rumors, he was actively planning to use the scandalous portrait as proof of Thalia's moral corruption to pressure Victor Voss into selling the family's most valuable shipping contracts at a fraction of their worth. Cassian's hand tightened around the paper until it crumpled. He had suspected Harrington's greed, but this was calculated destruction. Meanwhile, in the quiet safety of the East Wing sitting room, Thalia met secretly with Lady Arabella Thorne and Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove. The 3 women spoke in hushed voices. Arabella, with her sharp mind and loyal heart, had managed to obtain copies of suspicious correspondence. Mrs. Eleanor, using her years of quiet observation, had overheard conversations among the servants that pointed directly to Harrington's bribes. Thalia's fingers trembled as she read the letters. "I won't let him destroy my family," she whispered, fire flickering beneath the fear in her eyes. "Not when I still have breath to fight." That night, unable to sleep, Thalia slipped downstairs to the private portrait gallery. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, casting silver across dozens of ancestral paintings. She stopped before an empty space where her own scandalous portrait had once hung before being removed. Soft footsteps echoed behind her. She turned. Cassian stood in the doorway, his white shirt open at the collar. Dark hair slightly disheveled, as if he too had been restless. He looked at her for a long moment, the usual mask of icy control cracking just enough to reveal the storm beneath. "I know what Harrington is planning," he said quietly, stepping closer. "He wants to ruin you completely and take everything your father has built." Thalia's breath caught. "And what will you do about it?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Cassian stopped only an arm's length away. His gray eyes searched hers with an intensity that made her heart stutter. "I will stop him," he murmured. "But first, I need you to understand something." He hesitated, the proud future Duke suddenly looking painfully human. "For 3 years, Thalia, I have watched you, at balls, in your brother Rowan's drawing room, even from across crowded rooms when you laughed at something your friend said. I told myself it was nothing, that a man in my position could not afford feelings." His voice dropped lower, rough with long-buried truth. "But the night at Vauxhall, when I held you, everything I had buried came rushing back. There is an old family saying in our house, 'A duke does not love. He marries for power.' I kept my distance because I was afraid that if I let myself feel anything for you, I would break that rule, and breaking it could destroy us both." Thalia stared at him, tears gathering in her eyes. The air between them grew thick, heavy with everything unsaid. Cassian lifted his hand slowly, as if afraid she might vanish, and gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. His fingers lingered. Their faces drew closer, so close she could feel the warmth of his breath. Their lips were only a heartbeat away. Then, the soft click of the door. Lady Serena Drake, Cassian's younger sister, stood frozen in the entrance, her eyes wide with shock as she took in the intimate scene. "Cassian," she breathed, voice laced with disbelief and concern. The moment shattered. Cassian stepped back sharply, his expression closing once more behind that familiar wall of ice. Serena gave Thalia one long, searching look before quietly withdrawing, the door closing behind her with terrible finality. Silence swallowed the gallery. Thalia turned away from him, walking on unsteady legs toward the tall mirror at the far end of the room. She stared at her reflection, pale cheeks, trembling lips, eyes bright with unshed tears. The words broke from her like a wound finally opening. "I would rather society cast me out completely than remain a prisoner to a man who will never allow himself to love me." Her voice cracked on the last word. Cassian stood behind her, fists clenched at his sides. The pain in her words cut deeper than any accusation. For the first time, he saw clearly the depth of her suffering, and how much of it he had caused by hiding behind duty and fear. He wanted to reach for her. He wanted to tell her that the walls of ice around his heart were already melting, faster than he could control. But the words would not come. Not yet. Thalia wiped her tears with a trembling hand and walked past him without another glance, leaving the scent of roses and heartbreak in her wake. Cassian remained alone in the moonlit gallery, staring at the empty space where their almost kiss had nearly rewritten everything. Outside, in the darkened corridors of London, Lord Edmund Harrington continued weaving his web of lies, unaware that the fragile alliance between Thalia and Cassian had just been pushed to its breaking point. And somewhere deep inside the future Duke's guarded heart, the ice was no longer holding. The storm finally broke on the night of the grand summer ball at Blackthorn House. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead as London's elite filled the ballroom. Laughter and music floated through the air, but beneath the surface, something darker was gathering. Lord Edmund Harrington stepped onto the raised platform at the far end of the room, a cruel smile playing on his lips. With a dramatic gesture, he unveiled a large covered painting. Gasps rippled through the crowd. There it was again, The original scandalous portrait from Vauxhall Gardens, larger than life. But this time, Harrington had added forged documents and letters claiming Thalia had deliberately seduced Cassian for money and status. "The future Duke has been deceived," Harrington announced, his voice ringing with false concern. "This woman has compromised the sacred name of Blackthorn. By rights, the Duke should reconsider his heir." The room erupted in shocked whispers. Cassian stood frozen near the center of the ballroom, his face pale. His father, the Duke of Blackthorn, stared at him from across the room with cold disappointment. In that single moment, Cassian saw everything he had been raised to protect, his title, his legacy, his future, slipping away. Thalia felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She looked at her father, Victor Voss, whose shoulders had slumped with exhaustion. She saw her mother, Ilara, clutching her fan so tightly the ivory threatened to snap. Then she looked at Cassian, and something inside her broke open. No more hiding, no more pretending. Before anyone could stop her, Thalia walked straight through the crowd, her emerald silk gown whispering against the marble floor. She climbed the steps to stand beside the portrait, facing the entire assembly with her head held high. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with every word. "I painted this portrait." A stunned silence fell over the ballroom. "I painted it because I wanted to protect my family's honor after that terrible night at Vauxhall. The horse nearly killed me. Lord Drake saved my life. That moment was terror, not passion. But if society needed a villain to blame, then let it be me. I accept every whisper, every insult, every door that will now close in my face. But I will not let an innocent man lose everything because of one moment of kindness." Her hands shook violently at her sides, but she did not look away. Cassian stared at her, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Something inside him finally shattered. He crossed the ballroom in long, urgent strides, ignoring the shocked murmurs. Without hesitation, he dropped to one knee before Thalia in front of the entire ton. The room fell deathly quiet. "I was wrong," he said, his voice raw and unsteady. Tears glistened in his eyes, the first time anyone had ever seen the future Duke cry. "I was wrong to believe duty and honor mattered more than the woman standing before me. You have shown more courage tonight than I have shown in my entire life." He reached up and gently took her trembling hands in his. Lady Arabella Thorne stepped forward from the crowd, her voice clear and unwavering. "And I have proof that Lord Harrington bribed the artist and forged these documents." She held up a bundle of letters. Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove moved silently beside her, nodding with quiet strength as Arabella continued. "These are signed statements and payment records. Harrington wanted the Voss shipping contracts for himself. He tried to destroy an innocent woman, to steal what was never his." Gasps turned into angry murmurs directed at Harrington. The man's face drained of color as the crowd turned against him. Cassian rose slowly to his feet, still holding Thalia's hands. He looked into her eyes as if the rest of the world had disappeared. "I have loved you from the first moment I saw you 3 years ago," he confessed, voice thick with emotion. "At your brother Rowan's birthday gathering, you laughed at something silly, and the entire room seemed brighter. I told myself a duke cannot love freely. There was an old family curse. A duke does not love, he only secures power. I was terrified of breaking it, terrified of what loving you would cost my family, and what it would cost you." Thalia's tears spilled freely now, tracing silver paths down her cheeks. She looked at the man kneeling before her, no longer the cold, distant lord, but someone real, vulnerable, and desperately in love. Her voice came out soft, yet fierce. Love is not a portrait hanging on a wall for others to judge, she whispered through her tears. It is a choice, a burning choice to stand together, even when the whole world tries to put out the flame. For one breathless moment, the ballroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Then Cassian pulled her gently into his arms, holding her as if she were the only real thing left in his world. In the background, the Duke of Blackthorn watched in stunned silence. Lord Edmund Harrington was quietly escorted from the room by 2 footmen, his schemes collapsing around him. But Thalia and Cassian remained locked in that embrace, hearts pounding against each other, the weight of 3 long years of fear and longing finally beginning to lift. Yet even in that beautiful, chaotic moment, they both knew the greatest battle was still to come. Because choosing each other openly would demand a price neither of them had fully calculated. The days following the ball felt like walking through the eye of a storm, quiet, but heavy with the weight of what had just happened. In the grand study of Blackthorn House, the Duke stood by the tall window, his back rigid, hands clasped behind him. For a long time he said nothing. Cassian and Thalia waited in silence, their fingers barely touching, drawing strength from each other. Finally, the Duke turned. He looked at Thalia first, really looked at her, at the young woman who had willingly walked into fire to protect both families. Then he looked at his son, whose eyes held a determination the Duke had never seen before. "I have spent my life protecting this title," the Duke said slowly, his voice rough with reluctant emotion. "But last night, I watched a woman risk everything she had for honor that was not even her own. And I watched my son choose courage over pride." He paused, swallowing hard. "I publicly withdraw all accusations against Miss Thalia Voss. The portrait was a moment of heroism, not scandal. And I accept her as my future daughter-in-law." The words hung in the air like a benediction. Thalia felt her knees weaken. Cassian's hand tightened around hers, steadying her. Lord Edmund Harrington was not so fortunate. Within 48 hours, evidence of his bribes and forged documents spread through London like wildfire. The Ton turned on him with merciless speed. Invitations dried up, doors closed. By the end of the week, he left the city under the cover of darkness, his reputation in ruins, his greedy ambitions shattered. Justice, quiet and final, had been served. 1 week later, in the soft golden light of the Voss family drawing room, Cassian Drake stood before Thalia's entire family. Victor and Alara Voss watched with cautious hope. Rowan Voss stood with arms crossed, his expression still guarded. Lady Serena Drake stood quietly beside him, having spent many late nights talking with Rowan, gently helping him see beyond his protective instincts. Cassian did not look at anyone else. He looked only at Thalia. Slowly, gracefully, he lowered himself onto one knee. From his coat pocket, he drew a simple but exquisite sapphire ring, not the grand Blackthorn family heirloom, but one he had chosen himself, its deep blue reminding him of her eyes the night he first truly saw her. "Thalia Voss," he said, voice thick with feeling, "I have spent 3 years running from what I felt for you. I have hidden behind duty, behind fear, behind an old family curse that no longer matters. But you taught me that real honor is not protecting a name. It is protecting the woman I love." He took a shaky breath, eyes never leaving hers. "I am not asking you to marry the future Duke of Blackthorn. I am asking you to marry the man who fell in love with your laughter 3 years ago. The man who wants to spend every remaining day of his life earning the right to stand beside you. Will you be my wife? Not because of any contract, but because my heart has already chosen you, completely and forever." Tears slipped down Thalia's cheeks. She looked at her brother. Rowan met her eyes for a long moment. Then, with a small nod from Serena beside him, Rowan's shoulders relaxed. He gave a single, quiet nod of approval. Thalia turned back to Cassian, her voice soft but certain. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times. Yes. 2 years later, on a crisp winter evening, Blackthorn Manor glowed with warmth and candlelight. In the private portrait gallery, a special exhibition had been arranged for family and closest friends. At the very center of the room, in the place of highest honor, hung the once scandalous portrait from Vauxhall Gardens. Beneath it, a new plaque had been placed in elegant gold lettering, "The Duke's Chosen Heart." Thalia stood before the painting, her hand resting gently on the swell of her stomach where their first child was growing. Cassian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing a tender kiss to her temple. "Do you remember how terrified we both were?" he murmured against her hair. Thalia smiled, leaning back into his warmth. "I remember thinking I would rather be ruined than live without love," she said softly. "And you finally chose to live instead of simply existing." Cassian turned her gently in his arms so he could look into her eyes. "Dignity is not something others paint for us," he said quietly. "It is the choices we dare to make when the storm is at its worst. I almost lost you because I was afraid to choose. I will never make that mistake again." From the adjoining drawing room came the sound of laughter, Rowan telling a story, Serena's delighted voice joining in, little children's footsteps running across the floor. Thalia reached up and traced the line of Cassian's jaw with her fingertips. "We didn't just survive the storm," she whispered. "We learned how to dance in it." Cassian lowered his forehead to hers, eyes closing as peace settled deep in his chest. "And I will keep choosing you," he breathed, "every single day, for the rest of our lives." In the golden light of the gallery, the portrait that once threatened to destroy them now stood as a testament, not to scandal, but to courage, to love, and to the beautiful truth that the greatest honor any of us can claim is the courage to choose love when the whole world tells us we should not. This is a story that reminds us all. True love always demands bravery, the bravery to face our deepest fears, to break old curses, and to paint our own destiny, no matter how fiercely the storm may rage. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production, while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.